The pistol shot echoed through the timber yard, and Penelope Vance didn't flinch as the bottle shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces 50 yards away. She lowered her father's old revolver, ignoring the scandalized gasps from the women gathered outside Morrison's general store, their parasols trembling with collective disapproval as much as the August heat of Provo, Utah in 1878 demanded. "That girl has no sense of propriety, Mrs. Henderson announced loudly enough for half the town to hear. 23 years old and still acting like some wild thing. No wonder no decent man will have her." Penelope holstered the weapon at her hip, the leather belt sitting perfectly against her split riding skirt, another point of contention for the good ladies of Provo. She'd stopped caring what they thought around the same time her father died 2 years ago, leaving her the lumber business he'd built from nothing. The men in town had expected her to sell, to take whatever pittance they offered and fade into respectable obscurity. Instead, she'd rolled up her sleeves and learned every aspect of the trade, from negotiating timber rights to managing the crews who worked the mountain slopes. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," Penelope called out cheerfully, tipping her wide-brimmed hat. "Lovely day for target practice, wouldn't you say?" The older woman's face turned the color of pickled beets. Penelope smiled and strode toward the yard office, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust. She had contracts to review and a shipment to organize for the new railroad expansion heading south. Romance and respectability could wait. Actually, they could wait forever as far as she was concerned. She didn't see the stranger watching from across the street, his blue eyes tracking her movement with something that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite admiration, but somewhere interesting in between. Warren Ingram had been in Provo for exactly 3 hours, and he'd already learned more about Miss Penelope Vance than he'd expected. The livery stable owner had been chatty while seeing to Warren's horse, a sturdy roan gelding that had carried him all the way from Colorado. The general store clerk had added more details while Warren purchased supplies. The bartender at the Silver Spur Saloon had filled in the rest over a whiskey Warren nursed while considering his options. Independent, they all said. Too independent. Unwomanly. Difficult. Stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery. Warren had smiled into his whiskey because he knew what men said when they meant a woman wouldn't bend to their will. He'd come to Provo on business, hired by the railroad company to scout timber sources for the expansion. He'd expected to deal with a man named Vance, owner of the most productive lumber operation in the territory. Finding out Vance was a woman had been his first surprise. Watching her shoot had been his second. The fact that she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with delicate features and everything to do with fierce vitality had been his third. Now, standing in the morning sun watching her disappear into the timber yard office, Warren revised his plans. This negotiation was going to be more interesting than he'd anticipated. He gave her an hour to settle into her work before crossing the street. The timber yard sprawled across several acres, stacks of cut lumber arranged in neat rows, the air thick with the sweet scent of fresh pine and cedar. A massive sawmill dominated one end of the property, currently silent. 2 men lounged near the entrance, eyeing Warren with the casual suspicion of workers who'd seen their share of trouble. "Help you?" the older one asked, shifting a well-chewed piece of tobacco from one cheek to the other. "Looking for Miss Vance, I have business to discuss." The men exchanged glances. The younger one, barely out of his teens, grinned. "Good luck with that. She ran off the last 3 salesmen who came through here." "Good thing I'm not a salesman then." Warren tipped his hat and moved past them toward the small building that served as an office. Through the window, he could see Penelope bent over a desk, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, a pencil tucked behind one ear. She'd removed her gun belt, and it hung on a peg near the door alongside a worn leather jacket. He knocked, 2 solid raps that made her look up sharply. "We're fully staffed," she called out without rising. "Not hiring." Warren opened the door anyway, stepping into the cramped space that smelled of wood shavings and ink. "Not looking for work, looking to do business." She set down her pencil, her green eyes assessing him in one quick sweep. He felt the evaluation like a physical touch, taking in his dusty trail clothes, the quality of his boots, the way he carried himself, making calculations he couldn't quite read. "I don't do business with people who don't know how to wait for an invitation," she said flatly. "Then we're even, because I don't do business with people who don't have the courtesy to receive visitors properly." He smiled to take the edge off the words. "Can we start over?" Something flickered in her expression. Not quite amusement, but close. "You can start by stating your business and then leaving." Warren Ingram. "I represent the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad. We're expanding south, and we need a reliable timber supplier for the construction. Your operation came highly recommended." Now he had her attention. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with open skepticism. "Funny. I wrote to your company 6 weeks ago about supplying timber. Never got a response." "That's so." Warren pulled out the chair across from her desk and sat without being asked. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't object. "Who'd you write to?" "Regional manager. Man named Carson." "Tom Carson's an idiot who thinks women belong in kitchens, not businesses. Your letter probably never made it past his secretary." Warren met her gaze steadily. "I'm not Tom Carson. I'm the advanced scout, and I go where the quality timber is, regardless of who owns it." Pretty words. True words. "I saw your lumber on my way in. Clean cuts, properly seasoned, good variety of dimensions. You're running a tight operation here, Miss Vance. That's what I care about." She picked up the pencil again, rolling it between her fingers. "What kind of volume are we discussing?" They talked business for the next hour, and Warren found himself genuinely impressed. Penelope knew her inventory down to the last board foot. She understood pricing, market fluctuations, delivery logistics. She drove a hard bargain without being unreasonable, and she caught the one place where he tried to lowball her on transport costs. "You think because I'm a woman I don't know what freight runs to the rail depot?" she asked, but there was a hint of humor in her voice now. "I think because you're smart. I should have known better than to try." Warren grinned. "Fair price is 12 cents per board foot delivered. We'll need approximately 50,000 board feet to start, with options for additional contracts if the expansion continues on schedule." Penelope did the math in her head, and he could see the exact moment she calculated what that meant for her business. $6,000 to start, with the potential for much more. Enough to expand her own operation, buy new equipment, maybe hire additional crews for the winter cut. "I'll need half up front," she said. "Quarter up front, quarter on delivery, half on completion." "That's terrible terms for me." "What happens if your railroad decides to pull out halfway through?" "Won't happen. But if it makes you feel better, we can add a cancellation clause. We pull out, you keep all money paid to date plus 10% penalty." She considered this, tapping the pencil against her ledger. "Deal. But I want it in writing, proper contract, none of this handshake nonsense. Wouldn't have it any other way." Warren extended his hand across the desk. After a moment's hesitation, Penelope took it. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused from real work. The contact lasted a second longer than strictly necessary, and Warren noticed the slight widening of her eyes, the way her breath caught just a little. She noticed, too, pulling back and standing abruptly. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the contract. You can review it tomorrow." Your lawyer. You think I don't have legal representation, Mr. Ingram? I think you're full of surprises, Miss Vance. He stood, retrieving his hat from where he'd set it on the corner of her desk. I'm staying at the boarding house on Center Street. Send word when the contract's ready. I will. She walked him to the door, maintaining a careful distance. And Mr. Ingram, I appreciate you treating me like a businessman. Most men don't. Most men are fools. This time she did smile just a little. It transformed her face, softening the sharp edges of constant defensiveness. On that we can agree. Warren left the timber yard feeling oddly energized. He'd come to Provo expecting a straightforward business transaction. What he'd found was considerably more complicated and interesting. He spent the rest of the day exploring the town. A neat settlement nestled in the Utah Valley with the Wasatch Mountains rising dramatically to the east. Provo had grown steadily since the Mormon pioneers had first settled it 30 years earlier, and the recent arrival of the railroad had accelerated its expansion. New buildings were going up along the main streets, and there was an air of optimism that Warren recognized from other growing western towns. But it was a conservative place, religious and proper, which explained a lot about the town's attitude toward Penelope Vance. A woman running a business, carrying a gun, wearing split skirts instead of respectable dresses, it must scandalize half the population daily. He wondered why she stayed. A woman with her skills and capital could relocate somewhere more cosmopolitan, somewhere her independence wouldn't be such a constant battle. California, maybe, or back east, where women were starting to make inroads into business. The question was still on his mind that evening when he took supper at the boarding house. Mrs. Carmichael, the proprietor, served an excellent roast with potatoes and carrots, and she was more than happy to chat with her newest boarder. You met with Penelope Vance today, she said, setting down a basket of fresh bread. It wasn't a question. Word travels fast. In a town this size, everything travels fast. Mrs. Carmichael settled into the chair across from him, apparently deciding that conversation was more important than propriety. She was a widow, probably in her 50s, with kind eyes and capable hands. You doing business with her? Timber contract for the railroad expansion. Good. Girl deserves success. Lord knows she's worked hard enough for it. Mrs. Carmichael shook her head. Her father, John Vance, he was a good man, came out here with nothing but determination and built that business with his own 2 hands. When he died, folks expected Penelope to sell. Some of the men in town, they made offers. Low offers, thinking she'd be desperate. She wasn't desperate. She was grieving, but she wasn't stupid. She told them all to go to hell, pardon my language, and ran the business herself. Did a better job than her father, if I'm being honest, though I loved John dearly. Warren buttered a piece of bread, thinking, why do the townspeople give her such a hard time? Because she scares them. Mrs. Carmichael leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. She's proof that a woman doesn't need a man to survive. That's a dangerous idea in a place like this, where everything's built on certain expectations about how things should be. The women resent her because she has a freedom they'll never have. The men resent her because she won't submit to their authority. It's easier to call her too independent than to examine their own assumptions. Sounds lonely. I expect it is. She's got friends, mind you. My daughter Emma likes her quite a bit, though she's careful not to say so around her husband. And some of the younger women, the ones who aren't so set in their ways, they admire her even if they won't admit it publicly. Mrs. Carmichael stood, gathering the empty dishes. You seem like a decent sort, Mr. Ingram. Be kind to her. She's had precious little kindness from men since her father passed. That night, Warren lay in his narrow boarding house bed, listening to the sounds of Provo settling into darkness. Somewhere a dog barked. A wagon rattled past. In the distance, someone was playing a fiddle, the melody drifting through the summer air. He thought about Penelope Vance, her fierce competence and carefully guarded vulnerability. He thought about the way she'd smiled, that brief, unguarded moment before her defenses snapped back into place. Warren had never been the settling kind. At 29, he'd spent the last decade moving from place to place, taking work where he could find it, building a reputation as someone who got things done. He'd liked the freedom of it, the lack of ties. But lately, he'd started to feel the pull of something more permanent. Not just a place, but a purpose. Maybe even a person. He fell asleep thinking about green eyes and calloused hands, and the challenge of making a woman who needed no one decide she might want him anyway. The contract was ready by noon the next day. Warren read it carefully in Penelope's office while she pretended to work on her ledgers. It was thorough and fair, protecting both parties without unnecessary complications. The lawyer who'd drawn it up knew his business. "Looks good," Warren said, reaching for the pen she'd set out. "Got one addition, though." Her eyes narrowed. "We agreed on terms yesterday." "Business terms, yes. This is personal." He met her gaze. "Have dinner with me tonight." "That's not appropriate to put in a contract." "I'm not putting it in the contract. I'm asking separately. Have dinner with me, Penelope. No business talk, just two people sharing a meal." She sat back, clearly caught off guard. "Why?" "Because I'd like to get to know you better." "Because you're interesting and smart and you shoot better than half the men I know. Because when you smiled yesterday, it was the best part of my day." Color rose in her cheeks and she looked away. "People will talk. People are already talking. Might as well give them something worth gossiping about." "I don't date, Mr. Ingram. I don't have time for romantic entanglements. It's dinner, not a marriage proposal. One meal. If you hate it, I'll never ask again." He leaned forward. "What are you afraid of?" That got her attention. Her eyes snapped back to his, flashing with irritation. "I'm not afraid of anything." "Then prove it. Have dinner with me." She wanted to say no. He could see the refusal forming, the practiced dismissal she probably used on every man who showed interest. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the challenge in his words. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was just the loneliness Mrs. Carmichael had mentioned, the weight of always being strong, always being alone. "One dinner," she said finally. "But we go somewhere outside of Provo. I won't give these gossips the satisfaction of watching me dine with a man in their restaurants." "Fair enough. There's a roadhouse about 5 miles north, near the mouth of the canyon, place called the Copper Bell. Food's supposed to be decent." "I know it. 7 o'clock. "I'll pick you up at 6:30. She shook her head. "I'll meet you there. I don't need an escort." Warren grinned. "Of course you don't. See you at 7, Penelope." He signed the contract with a flourish, and they shook hands again to seal the deal. This time, when their palms met, she didn't pull away quite so quickly. Warren spent the afternoon arranging the financial details of the contract, sending a telegram to his employers in Denver to authorize the initial payment. By 4 o'clock, he deposited $3,000 in Penelope's account at the Provo bank. And the look of shock on the bank manager's face when he realized the deposit was, for Miss Vance, had been worth the trip alone. He cleaned up at the boarding house, changing into the one decent shirt he'd packed, and borrowed Mrs. Carmichael's iron to press the wrinkles out of his vest. She watched this preparation with undisguised amusement. "Taking Penelope to dinner?" she asked. "How did you know?" "Because you're humming while you iron, and no man hums over a business dinner." She handed him a clean neckerchief. "This would look better than that dusty thing you're wearing." Warren accepted it gratefully. "Thank you, and thank you for the advice last night. Just don't hurt her, Mr. Ingram. That girl's been hurt enough. I'll do my best." He rode north as the sun started its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The road followed the river, winding through farmland before starting to climb toward the canyon mouth. The Copper Bell sat at a wide spot in the road, a low building made of logs with a wide porch and cheerful yellow curtains in the windows. Penelope was already there, her horse tied to the hitching rail. She'd changed out of her work clothes into a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Her hair was still braided, but she'd tucked wildflowers into the plait, small white blooms that looked like stars against the dark strands. Warren dismounted, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since he was 16 and courting Sarah Miller back in Missouri. "You look beautiful." She shifted uncomfortably. "It's just a dress." "It's not the dress, it's you." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" After a moment's hesitation, she took it. They walked into the Copper Bell together, and the proprietor, a jovial man named Schmidt, showed them to a corner table with a view of the valley below. The sun was setting properly now, flooding the world with red and gold light. They ordered roast chicken and vegetables, and Warren asked for a bottle of wine. When it arrived, Penelope eyed it skeptically. "I don't drink much," she admitted. "Neither do I, but this seemed like a special occasion. Signing a business contract, meeting someone worth knowing." She looked down at her plate, but he saw the smile tugging at her lips. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the food as good as promised. Then Warren asked the question that had been bothering him. "Why do you stay in Provo?" Penelope paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean? You could run your business anywhere. Plenty of places out west where a woman in business wouldn't raise eyebrows. So why stay in a town that makes you fight for every inch of respect?" She set down her fork, considering the question seriously. "My father's buried here. The business he built is here, and maybe that's not the whole truth. Maybe the real answer is that I refuse to let them drive me out. This is my home, my land, my business. I've earned my place here, and I'll be damned if I let small-minded gossip chase me away. That takes courage. Or stubbornness. Most people can't tell the difference. I can." Warren refilled her wine glass. "Tell me about your father." Her face softened. "He was wonderful, funny and strong and endlessly optimistic. He came west after my mother died, bringing me with him. I was 8 years old, terrified and grieving. He made it an adventure instead of a tragedy. Taught me everything he knew about timber, about business, about standing on your own feet. He'd be proud of you." "I hope so." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Some days I feel like I'm honoring his memory. Other days I feel like I'm just being stubborn because I don't know how to do anything else. Those aren't mutually exclusive." They talked through dinner and into the evening, conversation flowing easier than Warren had expected. Penelope was funny when she let her guard down, with a dry wit that caught him off guard. She asked him about his work, his travels, and he found himself telling her stories he hadn't thought about in years. Growing up in Missouri, the restlessness that had driven him west, the satisfaction of building something where there'd been nothing before. "You ever want to settle down?" she asked as they finished the wine. "I used to think no. Lately I've been reconsidering." "What changed?" "I did, I suppose. You spend enough years drifting, you start to wonder what you're drifting toward. Or maybe you just get tired of sleeping in different beds every week." He looked at her across the table, the lamplight catching in her eyes. "What about you? Do you ever want more than the business?" "More how?" "A family, partnership, love." She was quiet for a long moment. "I wanted those things once, when I was younger, before I understood how the world works. But every man who courted me wanted me to give up the business to be something smaller than I am. After a while, I stopped wanting things that required me to diminish myself." What if you found someone who loved you precisely because of who you are, not in spite of it? That's a fairy tale, Mr. Ingram. Warren, and maybe it is, or maybe you just haven't met the right person yet. Their eyes held across the table and something electric passed between them. Penelope broke the contact first, looking out at the darkness beyond the window. We should go. It's getting late. Warren paid the bill and they walked out into the cool night air. The stars were brilliant overhead, the Milky Way a river of light across the sky. Their horses stood quietly at the rail, patient and drowsy. "Thank you for dinner," Penelope said, moving toward her mount. "It was nice. Just nice." She turned back, and in the starlight her smile was luminous. "It was wonderful, terrifying but wonderful." "Why terrifying?" "Because I liked it, because I like you, and that complicates everything." Warren closed the distance between them, moving slowly enough that she could retreat if she wanted. She didn't. "It doesn't have to be complicated." "Everything about me is complicated." "Good thing I like a challenge." He reached up, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She trembled at the contact but didn't pull away. They stood like that for a long moment, the night settling around them, the only sound the whisper of wind through the grass. "I should go," Penelope whispered, but she didn't move. "Then go." Instead, she kissed him. It was quick and fierce, and over almost before it began, her lips warm against his. Then she pulled back, eyes wide with something that looked like panic. "Good night, Warren." She was on her horse and riding away before he could respond, disappearing down the road toward Provo at a gallop that suggested she was fleeing rather than simply departing. Warren stood in the starlight, touching his lips where she'd kissed him, and grinned like a fool. Over the next 2 weeks, Warren had legitimate reasons to visit the timber yard nearly every day. Details about the contract, questions about delivery schedules, discussions about wood quality and specifications. Penelope saw through the excuses. He was sure of it, but she didn't call him on them. They fell into an easy rhythm. He'd arrive mid-morning, conduct whatever business he'd invented, and then they'd talk. Sometimes about work, sometimes about everything else. She showed him her operation, explaining the complexities of sustainable logging, how she rotated her crews through different sections of forest to allow regrowth. He shared his knowledge of railroad construction, the engineering marvels that were pushing civilization across the continent. The men in her crew noticed, of course. Warren caught their speculative glances, heard the whispers that stopped when he came near. But Penelope's workers respected her, and they seemed to have decided that Warren was acceptable as long as he didn't interfere with business. Old Thomas, the sawmill foreman, pulled Warren aside one afternoon. "You serious about her?" "Yes, sir, I am." "Good. She deserves someone serious, but you hurt her and you'll answer to me and every man in this yard. We clear?" "Crystal clear." Thomas nodded, satisfied. "She's hard on the outside because she has to be, but she's got a good heart. Don't take advantage of that." "I wouldn't dream of it." Warren saw Penelope differently after that conversation, understanding more clearly the tightrope she walked. Tough enough to command respect from rough men in a rough business, but vulnerable enough that her workers felt protective of her. It was a delicate balance, and she maintained it with a grace that looked effortless, but must have been exhausting. He asked her to dinner again, and this time she said yes without hesitation. They rode to a different roadhouse, this one west toward the lake, and talked until the proprietor started pointedly blowing out lamps. Warren told her about his mother, who died when he was 12, and how he still missed her apple pie. Penelope confessed that she was terrified of thunderstorms, a legacy of a tornado that had nearly destroyed their home when she was a child. "Don't tell anyone," she said, only half joking. "It would ruin my reputation as fearless. Your secret's safe with me." The second dinner ended with another kiss, longer this time, standing beside her horse in the moonlight. Warren felt the war in her, the desire to surrender to feeling battling against years of self-protection. He didn't push, just held her gently and let her set the pace. "This is crazy," she murmured against his shoulder. "Why? Because you're leaving. Your work here is temporary. The contract's signed, the timber's being cut and delivered. In a few weeks, you'll move on to the next job, the next town, and I'll still be here." Warren pulled back enough to look at her face. "What if I don't want to move on? Don't say things you don't mean." "I never do." He cupped her face in his hands. "I'm falling in love with you, Penelope Vance. I know it's fast and I know it's inconvenient, but that doesn't make it less true." Her eyes shimmered with tears she refused to shed. "I can't give up my business. I won't. Did I ask you to? You will. Eventually they all do. Then I'm not like everyone else, am I?" She kissed him instead of answering, and Warren decided that was response enough for now. The gossip in Provo reached a fever pitch. Warren heard the whispers everywhere he went. The Vance girl and that railroad man carrying on shamefully, meeting in secret, behaving improperly. The speculation ranged from merely scandalous to completely absurd, and Warren weathered it with amused tolerance. Penelope was less amused. She confronted him at the timber yard one morning, her face tight with anger. "Mrs. Henderson told everyone at church that we're living in sin," she said without preamble. "Half the congregation believes it. We know it's not true. That's what matters. It matters to my business, Warren. I've worked too hard to build my reputation to have it destroyed by gossip." "Then let's give them something real to talk about." She stared at him. "What are you suggesting? Marry me?" The words hung in the air between them. Penelope's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, hope, fear, finally settling on wary skepticism. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." Warren took her hands, feeling them tremble in his grip. "I love you. I want to build a life with you. Not a life where you give up everything you've worked for, but a real partnership. Marry me, Penelope. You've known me 3 weeks. Long enough to know I don't want to know life without you." She pulled her hands away, pacing the small office like a caged animal. "This is insane. You're asking me to trust that you're different, that you won't try to control me or diminish me or take what's mine. I'm asking you to take a chance on something good. I don't know how." Her voice cracked, and the vulnerability in it nearly broke his heart. "I've spent so long protecting myself, Warren. I don't know how to let someone in." He crossed to her, gathering her into his arms. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against him, her face buried in his chest. "You don't have to know how," he said softly. "We'll figure it out together. That's what partnership means." "What about your work? The railroad?" "I've been thinking about that. I've got enough saved to invest in a business if I wanted. Your timber operation could expand with additional capital. We could be partners, real partners in business and in life." She pulled back to look at him. "You do that. Give up traveling, put down roots. I do that and more for you." "With you," he smiled. "I'm tired of drifting, Penelope. I'm ready to build something that lasts, and I can't think of anyone I'd rather build it with." Tears spilled down her cheeks now, and she didn't bother wiping them away. "I'm terrified." "Me too. What if we're making a mistake?" "What if we're not?" She laughed, a watery sound that was half sob. "You're supposed to have answers, not more questions." "The only answer I have is that I love you. Everything else we'll figure out as we go." Penelope kissed him then, deep and long and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Warren whooped with joy, picking her up and spinning her around the small office. She laughed, really laughed, the sound bright and free and beautiful. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. "When?" he asked. "As soon as possible." Before I lose my nerve, tomorrow, give me a week. I want to do this right." They planned the wedding with the same efficiency they brought to business. Small ceremony, immediate family and close friends only, to be held at the small church on the edge of town. Penelope asked Mrs. Carmichael's daughter Emma to stand up with her, and Warren asked old Thomas, who gruffly accepted and then immediately tried to hide how pleased he was. The town's reaction was mixed. Some were scandalized that Penelope was marrying a near stranger. Others were relieved that she was finally settling down into respectability. A few, the ones who knew her best, were simply happy that she'd found someone who made her smile. The night before the wedding, Warren stayed at the boarding house while Penelope remained at her small house near the timber yard. Mrs. Carmichael fussed over him like a mother hen, pressing his suit and making sure his boots were polished. "You nervous?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted. "What if I can't make her happy?" "Happiness isn't something you make for someone else. It's something you build together." She patted his shoulder. "You'll do fine, Mr. Ingram. You've got a good heart and you see Penelope for who she truly is. That's more than most men can say." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the September air crisp with the promise of autumn. Warren stood at the altar in his best suit, palms sweating, heart racing. The little church was half full, curious townspeople mixed with genuine well-wishers. Then Penelope appeared at the back of the church, and Warren forgot how to breathe. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, nothing fancy or elaborate, but she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, threaded with more of those white wildflowers. She walked down the aisle alone, her chin high, her eyes locked on his. When she reached the altar, Warren took her hands and felt them trembling. "You okay?" he whispered. "Ask me later," she whispered back, but she was smiling. The ceremony was brief and traditional. They exchanged vows, simple promises to love and honor and cherish. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Warren kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to more than a few eyes in the congregation. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, facing the uncertain future as partners. The reception was held at the Silver Spur Saloon, cleared of its usual clientele for the afternoon. There was cake and punch, and someone had brought a fiddle. Old Thomas made a toast that was surprisingly eloquent, praising Penelope's strength and Warren's good sense. Emma hugged Penelope and whispered something that made the bride laugh. As the afternoon wore into evening, Warren and Penelope slipped away from the celebration. They rode to her house, the place that would now be their home. It was small but well built, with a view of the mountains and a garden that Penelope admitted she neglected shamefully. Inside, Warren saw evidence of the woman he'd married everywhere. Books stacked on every surface, ledgers and contracts mixed with volumes of poetry and natural history. A worn armchair by the fireplace where she must spend her evenings reading. Simple furniture built for function rather than show. "It's not much," Penelope said nervously. "It's perfect." Warren pulled her close. "Everything about this day has been perfect." She tilted her face up to his, and the kiss that followed was full of promise and desire and hope. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other with patience and care. Penelope trembled in his arms, and Warren understood he was being trusted with something precious, a vulnerability she showed no one else. Afterward, lying in the darkness with her head on his chest, Penelope whispered, "I'm still scared." "So am I," Warren admitted, "but I'm also happy. Happier than I've ever been. Even though I'm too independent," he laughed, the sound rumbling in his chest. "Especially because you're independent. That's what I love most about you, Penelope. Your strength, your spirit, your refusal to be anything less than who you are." She raised herself on one elbow, looking down at him in the moonlight filtering through the window. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise that if I ever stop being myself, if I start trying to be what I think you want instead of who I am, you'll call me on it. I need to be your partner, not your shadow, I promise, on one condition." "What's that?" "You promise me the same thing. This partnership goes both ways." She smiled and sealed the promise with a kiss. The next months tested that promise in ways neither of them had anticipated. Combining their lives wasn't as simple as saying vows and sharing a home. Warren invested his savings in the lumber business as promised, but that meant learning operations from the ground up. He was used to being an expert, and becoming a novice again bruised his pride. Penelope struggled to share control of the business she'd run alone for 2 years. She'd snap at Warren for reorganizing the office or changing procedures without consulting her. He'd get frustrated when she dismissed his ideas without hearing him out. Their first real fight happened 3 weeks after the wedding, over something trivial that escalated into something bigger. Warren had hired 2 new workers without discussing it with Penelope first. She'd returned from a delivery to find strangers in her timber yard and exploded with fury. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she shouted, pacing their small living room while Warren tried to explain. "You coming in and taking over, making decisions without me, treating my business like it's yours to run." "Our business," Warren shot back. "Or did those vows mean nothing?" "I invested everything I have into this operation. I'm not some hired hand you can order around. I never asked you to invest. That was your choice. A choice I made because I wanted to build something with you. Together, Penelope. That means I get a say in decisions. Not without consulting me first. You weren't here to consult, and we needed those workers. We're 3 men short for the winter cut. So you unilaterally decided to hire them." "Yes, I did, because sometimes decisions need to be made and I'm capable of making them." They stood glaring at each other, both breathing hard, both angry and hurt and scared that maybe this partnership was a mistake after all. Penelope spoke first, her voice quiet. "I'm not angry that you hired them. I'm angry that you didn't think my opinion mattered enough to wait." Warren deflated. "Your opinion matters more than anything. I'm sorry. I got impatient and made a decision I should have waited to make with you. And I'm sorry for assuming the worst, for jumping to the conclusion that you were trying to take over." She sank into the armchair, looking exhausted. "This is harder than I thought it would be. Learning to share your life, learning to trust." She looked up at him, eyes shining with unshed tears. "I want this to work, Warren. I want us to work, but I don't know how to stop fighting for control of everything." He knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands. "Then we learn together. We make mistakes and we talk about them and we do better next time. That's what partners do." "Is it always this hard?" "I don't know. I've never done this before either." He smiled. "But I'm willing to keep trying if you are." She pulled him close, holding tight. "I'm willing." They established new rules after that. Major decisions required consultation with both of them. Minor day-to-day operations could be handled individually, but they'd review everything together at week's end. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Warren proved to be a quick learner and a capable businessman. His experience with railroad logistics translated well to timber operations, and he had ideas about expanding their market reach that Penelope had never considered. She taught him the intricacies of sustainable forestry, the patience required to manage a renewable resource. Together, they made the business stronger. By December, they'd hired a full crew for the winter cut and secured 2 additional contracts beyond the railroad work. The bank manager, who'd been openly skeptical of their partnership, started treating Warren with grudging respect and Penelope with something approaching awe. The town slowly adjusted to seeing them as a unit. Warren made it clear in every interaction that Penelope was his equal partner, not his subordinate. When men tried to discuss business with him and exclude her, he redirected the conversation. When women tried to engage Penelope in domestic topics and ignore Warren's business acumen, she did the same. It wasn't always comfortable, but they were changing minds one interaction at a time. Winter in Utah was harsh and beautiful. Snow blanketed the valley, and the mountains became jagged white peaks against brilliant blue skies. The timber crews worked through the cold, cutting the trees that would be processed come spring. Warren learned to navigate frozen logging roads and handle teams of oxen in deep snow. He came home each evening exhausted and exhilarated, and Penelope would have hot coffee waiting and a fire crackling in the hearth. They'd review the day's work over dinner, planning and strategizing and occasionally disagreeing, but always talking it through. On Christmas Eve, Warren surprised Penelope with a gift. It was a new gun belt, custom-made with her initials tooled into the leather. She ran her fingers over the craftsmanship, eyes wide. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "But why?" "Because I never want you to stop being the woman who shoots bottles at 50 yards and doesn't flinch. Because your strength and independence aren't things to change, they're things to celebrate." He pulled out a second, smaller package. "And this is just because I love you." Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. Penelope opened it to find 2 miniature photographs, one of her father, the other of Warren. "So you can carry your past and your future with you," Warren said softly. She cried then, happy tears that she didn't try to hide. "I got you something too." Her gift was a leather-bound journal, the pages blank and waiting. "For your thoughts," she said. "You're always talking about wanting to write down your experiences, the places you've been and the things you've learned. Now you can." They spent Christmas quietly, just the two of them, building their own traditions. They attended church in the morning, where Penelope wore her new locket and noticed the approving nods from some of the congregants. In the afternoon, they visited Mrs. Carmichael, bringing gifts and staying for dinner. "You two look happy," Emma observed, watching Warren and Penelope interact with the easy comfort of people who'd learned to move around each other. "We are," Penelope admitted. "It's different than I expected being married. Better in some ways, harder in others. But good, really good." That night, lying in bed with snow falling softly outside their window, Warren voiced a thought he'd been carrying for weeks. "I've been thinking about expanding the business even more. Adding a furniture workshop, using our own lumber to create finished pieces. We could hire craftsmen, sell to the growing markets in Salt Lake City and beyond." Penelope was quiet for a moment. "That would require significant capital investment." "It would, and significant risk. But the potential returns are substantial. What do you think we should do?" Warren noticed the shift in pronouns, the easy assumption of joint decision-making. "I think we should research it thoroughly, run the numbers, and make a decision together." "Good answer." She smiled in the darkness. "Let's do it." The furniture workshop became their project for the following year. They visited manufacturers in Salt Lake City, studying production methods and market demands. They interviewed craftsmen and reviewed countless financial projections. Penelope's caution balanced Warren's enthusiasm, and his optimism countered her risk aversion. By spring, they'd hired 3 skilled woodworkers and converted one of the smaller storage buildings into a workshop. The first pieces were simple, tables and chairs and storage chests, but beautifully made. They showcased the quality of the lumber and the skill of the craftsmen. Warren handled sales and distribution while Penelope managed production and quality control. It was a natural division of labor that played to their respective strengths. The furniture sold well, and within 6 months they were profitable. Success brought its own challenges. They had to hire an office manager to handle the growing administrative work. The original timber yard crew doubled in size. Penelope spent less time in the field and more time managing operations, and Warren saw how much she missed the physical work. "Take a day," he suggested one morning when he found her staring wistfully out the office window at the mountains. "Go ride the timber lines, check on the crews. I can handle things here. We have the contract review meeting this afternoon. I can do that alone." She turned to him, grateful and hesitant. "Are you sure? Positive. Go, be in the mountains, come back refreshed." Penelope kissed him hard and was out the door within minutes, her horse saddled and ready. Warren watched her ride away, her face already lighter, and smiled to himself. The meeting went fine without her, but he noticed how much he relied on her instincts and her knowledge. When she returned that evening, wind-blown and happy, he peppered her with questions about the decisions he'd made, wanting her input even after the fact. "You did fine," she assured him, reviewing the signed contracts. "Better than fine, but I'm glad you want my opinion anyway. Always." Summer brought a heat wave that tested everyone's patience. The sawmill was stifling, and the workshop even worse. Warren and Penelope took to starting work before dawn and stopping during the worst afternoon heat, then resuming in the cooler evening hours. One particularly brutal afternoon, Penelope suggested something radical. "Let's go swimming." "Where?" "There's a place up the canyon, a pool below a waterfall. I used to go there as a girl." They rode up into the mountains, following a narrow trail that climbed through pine forest. The air cooled as they ascended, and Warren could hear running water long before they reached the pool. It was perfect, a deep basin of clear water fed by a cascade of white water tumbling down the rocks. Penelope dismounted and started pulling off her boots without preamble. "Last one in has to cook dinner for a week," she called over her shoulder, already unlacing her skirt. Warren laughed and raced to catch up. They plunged into the cold water together, the shock of it stealing their breath and washing away the week's accumulated heat and stress. They played like children, splashing and diving and floating on their backs, watching clouds drift overhead. Later, sitting on sun-warmed rocks while their clothes dried, Penelope leaned against Warren's shoulder. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not trying to change me. For loving the parts of me that everyone else finds difficult. Those are my favorite parts." She turned to look at him, water still dripping from her hair, her face open and unguarded in a way it rarely was. "I want to have a baby." The statement caught Warren completely off guard. They'd never discussed children, both too focused on building the business and their partnership. He searched her face, seeing hope and fear in equal measure. "Yeah," he asked softly. "Yeah, I think I'm ready. I think we're ready if you want to, I mean, if that's something you'd want." Warren pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "I would love nothing more than to have a family with you." She relaxed against him, and they sat in the mountain sunshine making plans for a future that suddenly seemed even brighter than before. Penelope became pregnant that fall, and the news transformed her in ways Warren hadn't anticipated. She glowed with joy but also wrestled with anxiety about how motherhood would affect her work. They had long conversations about balance, about what she was willing to delegate and what she needed to maintain. "I don't want to give up everything I've built," she said one evening, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Then don't. We'll figure it out. Hire more help, adjust schedules, do whatever we need to do." "What if I'm terrible at it, at being a mother?" "You'll be magnificent. You're fierce and protective and strong. Our children will be lucky to have you." The pregnancy was difficult. Penelope suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and Warren learned to make ginger tea and keep crackers by the bedside. She hated being weakened by her own body, hated needing help with tasks she'd always done independently. "I feel useless," she complained, frustrated and nauseated. "You're growing a human being. That's the opposite of useless. Tell that to the timber contracts piling up on my desk. The contracts will wait. Rest." As her pregnancy progressed, they made changes to accommodate her changing body and energy levels. Warren took over more of the physical inspection work, and they hired Emma's younger sister to help with office administration. Penelope directed operations from the office, and if she sometimes felt frustrated by the limitations, she also felt deeply loved by Warren's constant support. The townswomen who'd scorned her independence now offered cautious friendship, united by the common experience of pregnancy and impending motherhood. Penelope accepted their advice with bemusement, sorting the useful information from the old wives' tales. "They told me not to raise my arms above my head or the baby will strangle on the cord," she reported to Warren one evening, half amused and half exasperated. "That's ridiculous. I know. But Mrs. Henderson also told me about a wonderful midwife, so I suppose it's worth wading through the nonsense." Warren's mother instinct kicked in strong. He became protective to the point of being overbearing, until Penelope finally sat him down and laid down the law. "I love you," she said firmly. "But if you try to wrap me in cotton wool one more time, I'm going to shoot you. I'm pregnant, not made of glass. I'm just worried. I know, but you need to trust that I know my own limits and will ask for help when I need it." It was a hard lesson for both of them, finding the balance between care and control. But they worked it out, as they worked out everything else, through honest conversation and mutual respect. Their son was born on a cold March morning in 1880, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. The labor was long and difficult, and Warren paced the small house, wearing a path in the floor while the midwife worked. When he was finally allowed into the bedroom, he found Penelope exhausted but radiant, holding a red-faced bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "Meet Matthew," she said, her voice hoarse but happy. "Matthew Ingram." Warren touched his son's tiny hand, feeling the infant's fingers close around his own, and felt his heart expand in ways he hadn't known were possible. "He's perfect. He has your nose. Poor kid," she laughed, then winced. "Don't make me laugh. Everything hurts." Warren sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his arm around his wife, looking down at their son. "We made this, you and me together. Best thing we've ever built," Penelope agreed. Motherhood transformed Penelope again, but not in the ways Warren had feared. She didn't lose her edge or her independence. Instead, she became even more formidable, now protecting not just her business but her family. She returned to work 3 weeks after Matthew's birth, bringing the baby with her in a basket that she kept in the office. The workers were charmed by the infant, and old Thomas appointed himself unofficial grandfather, carving toys and making faces that drew toothless smiles. Penelope nursed the baby between meetings and reviewed contracts while rocking him to sleep. It was exhausting and chaotic, and somehow it worked. Warren marveled at his wife's capacity. She seemed to have infinite energy for both business and motherhood, though he knew she must be running on sheer determination half the time. He tried to take on more of the nighttime care, walking Matthew through the dark hours when the baby fussed and wouldn't settle. Those quiet pre-dawn hours became some of Warren's favorites, holding his son against his shoulder, feeling the small, warm weight and the trust it represented. He'd tell Matthew stories about his mother's strength, about the business they were building for his future, about the importance of respecting women and treating them as equals. "Your mama's special," he whispered to the drowsy infant. "She's strong and smart and brave. When you grow up, I want you to find someone like her, someone who challenges you and makes you better." By Matthew's first birthday, the business had grown to include a second furniture workshop and expanded timber operations into 2 additional mountain ranges. Penelope and Warren were recognized throughout the territory as successful entrepreneurs, a husband and wife team whose partnership had created something remarkable. The town's attitude toward Penelope had shifted entirely. The women who'd once scorned her now sought her advice. Young girls looked at her with admiration, seeing possibilities they'd never imagined before. And the men who'd once dismissed her had learned, sometimes painfully, that she was a force to be reckoned with. Warren loved watching her navigate it all, the business and motherhood and community leadership. She'd grown into her role without sacrificing the fierce independence that had first attracted him. If anything, she was more herself now than ever. They talked one evening about having more children. Matthew was toddling around their expanded house, getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of a 1-year-old. "I want at least 2 more," Penelope said, watching their son attempt to climb the furniture. "I was lonely as an only child. I want Matthew to have siblings." "2 more sounds good, though we might need a bigger house. We might need a lot of things, more staff, better organization, possibly less sleep than we're already getting." Warren pulled her close. "We'll manage, we always do. You know what the best part is?" Penelope tilted her face up to his. "Everyone said I was too independent, too difficult, too unwomanly, too everything. They said no man would ever accept me as I am, and then you came along and loved me not just in spite of those things, but because of them. They were fools for not seeing how extraordinary you are. Maybe. But I'm glad they were fools, because it meant I was still free when you found me." Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Warren's mother, was born 2 years later. The pregnancy was easier, and Penelope barely slowed down, working until the day before Sarah arrived and returning to the office within 2 weeks. Sarah was different from Matthew, quieter and more observant. She'd study the world with serious eyes, and even as an infant she seemed to be taking everything in. Penelope adored her, and Warren discovered new depths of tenderness he hadn't known he possessed. With 2 children, they had to make more adjustments. They hired a nanny, a capable young woman named Ruth who managed the children during business hours. Penelope struggled with this more than she'd expected, feeling guilty for not being with her children every moment. "You're a good mother," Warren assured her. "Being a good mother doesn't mean giving up everything else that makes you who you are. Society says it does. Society said a lot of things about you that turned out to be wrong." She laughed, the tension easing from her shoulders. "Fair point." They built a routine that worked for their family. Mornings were for the children, with Penelope and Warren both present for breakfast and playtime. The workday ran from mid-morning to early evening, with Ruth caring for the children. Evenings were family time again, dinner and stories and bedtime routines that both parents shared. It wasn't conventional, but it worked. The children thrived, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and valued. The business flourished, benefiting from the continued partnership of 2 people who respected and complemented each other. And Warren and Penelope's marriage deepened, tested by challenges and strengthened by how they faced them together. Their third child, another son they named John after Penelope's father, arrived when Matthew was 5 and Sarah was 3. By then, they'd moved to a larger house on the outskirts of town, with enough room for their growing family and a view of both the mountains and the timber yard. John was a handful from the beginning, energetic and fearless, and absolutely convinced he could do anything his older siblings could do. Warren spent a lot of time pulling him out of trees and fishing him out of the horse trough and generally preventing disaster. "He's just like you," Penelope observed, watching Warren extract John from yet another precarious situation. "He is not. I was never this reckless." "According to Mrs. Carmichael, you absolutely were. She said you climbed onto the boarding house roof your second week in town trying to fix a loose shingle. That was different. That was helpful. You fell through and had to be extracted by 3 men and a ladder." Warren grinned sheepishly. "Okay, maybe he's a little like me." By 1890, 12 years after Warren had first ridden into Provo, the Ingram Timber and Furniture Company was one of the largest employers in the Utah Valley. They'd built a second lumber mill and expanded the furniture workshops to produce pieces that were sold as far away as California and New York. Matthew, now 10 years old, already showed interest in the business. He'd spend hours in the workshop watching the craftsmen work, asking questions and trying his hand at simple projects. Sarah, at 8, was more interested in the financial side, often found studying the ledgers with a seriousness that made both her parents laugh. John, at 5, was interested in everything and committed to nothing, a whirlwind of energy and curiosity who kept everyone on their toes. Warren and Penelope had settled into their partnership with the ease of long practice. They still disagreed sometimes, still had to work through conflicts and different perspectives, but they'd learned how to fight fair and how to compromise. More importantly, they'd learned that their differences made them stronger, not weaker. One evening, sitting on the porch of their home watching the sun set behind the mountains, Penelope leaned against Warren's shoulder. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up traveling, putting down roots, tying yourself to one place and one person?" "Never. Not once." He kissed the top of her head. "This life with you and our children, building something that matters, it's everything I never knew I wanted. Even though I'm difficult and independent and occasionally impossible, especially because of that. You challenge me, Penelope. You make me better. I love our partnership in business and in life." She tilted her face up to his. "I love you, Warren Ingram. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked right past me. Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter who didn't know he was looking for home until he found you." They kissed as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, their children's laughter drifting from inside the house, their business humming with quiet success in the valley below. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. A fire in one of the workshops tested their resilience and their insurance policies. A drought year reduced timber yields and required careful management of resources. The children went through various illnesses and accidents that gave their parents gray hairs, but there were triumphs too. Matthew's first successful furniture piece, a beautiful chest he designed and built himself at age 14. Sarah's skillful negotiation of a major contract that saved them thousands of dollars. John's discovery of a stand of premium walnut trees on land they'd been about to sell. Warren and Penelope navigated it all together, their partnership tested and proven time and again. They'd built something rare, a marriage of equals where neither dominated and both flourished. Their success wasn't just measured in money or business growth, though both were considerable. It was measured in the life they'd created, the family they'd raised, the respect they'd earned from each other and their community. On their 20th anniversary, Warren surprised Penelope with a trip, just the two of them. They left the children with Ruth, now more family than employee, and rode up into the mountains to the waterfall pool where Penelope had first told him she wanted a baby. It was summer again, the water crystal clear and cold, the meadow around it brilliant with wildflowers. They swam and talked and remembered, celebrating 20 years of love and partnership. "I was so scared that day," Penelope admitted, floating on her back in the cool water. "Scared of wanting something I thought I couldn't have. Scared of trusting you enough to build a family. I was scared too. Scared of disappointing you, of not being enough, of breaking something precious. But we did it. We built something beautiful. We did. And we're not done yet." She swam over to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "What else do you want to build? More of this. More years together. More memories. Maybe more adventures once the kids are grown. I want to travel with you, show you all the places I've been, see them new through your eyes. I'd like that." She kissed him, soft and sweet. "I love you, Warren, even more now than I did 20 years ago." "How is that possible?" "Because I know you now. I've seen you in every situation, every mood, every challenge. I've watched you be a father and a partner and a friend. I've seen your strength and your kindness and your integrity. Loving you is easy. It's the easiest thing I've ever done." Warren held her close in the mountain pool, the water cool around them, the sun warm on their shoulders, and felt a profound gratitude for the path that had led him to this moment, this woman, this life. Matthew took over more of the business operations as he matured, showing a natural aptitude for both the technical and managerial aspects. Sarah surprised everyone by going to university in Salt Lake City, the first woman in the family to pursue higher education. She studied business and finance, fully intending to return and modernize the company's practices. John, true to his restless nature, tried his hand at various aspects of the operation before finding his niche in expansion and development. He had Warren's love of travel and Penelope's eye for opportunity, and he spent his late teens exploring new markets and establishing distribution networks. Warren and Penelope watched their children grow with pride and occasional bemusement. They'd raised them to be independent and strong-willed, and sometimes that meant stepping back and letting them make their own decisions, even when those decisions weren't what the parents would have chosen. "They're so sure of themselves," Penelope observed one evening, watching Matthew and Sarah debate a business strategy with the confidence of people who never doubted their right to opinions. "Wonder where they got that from," Warren said dryly. She laughed. "Fair point. Still, it's strange watching them become adults. When did that happen? While we were busy living our lives, loving each other, building our empire." Empire, that's a grand word for a timber business. It's a grand business, and it's more than just timber now. Furniture, distribution, real estate holdings. We've built something that will outlast us, Penelope. Something our children and their children will inherit. That's legacy. By their 25th anniversary, Warren was 54 and Penelope was 48. They'd weathered the passage of time with grace, their faces lined with years of laughter and worry, their bodies marked by decades of hard work. But their love had only deepened, refined by experience into something unshakable. The business was more successful than ever, now run primarily by Matthew with input from his parents and siblings. Warren and Penelope had started to step back, not retiring entirely, but allowing themselves more freedom to pursue other interests. Warren had finally started writing seriously, documenting his experiences and observations in the journals Penelope had given him years ago. She encouraged him, reading his drafts and offering thoughtful feedback. Some of his articles had been published in territorial newspapers, and a publisher in San Francisco had expressed interest in a book. Penelope had become involved in advocating for women's business rights, using her own success as an example of what was possible. She spoke at gatherings and wrote letters to legislators, arguing for changes in laws that restricted women's economic freedom. It was work that energized her, giving her a new purpose beyond the day-to-day management of the company. They'd found a new rhythm to their lives, still partners in business, but also individuals with their own passions and projects. The independence that had first brought them together remained a cornerstone of their relationship, balanced now by deep interdependence and trust. One autumn evening, with the aspen trees turning gold on the mountainsides and the air crisp with the promise of winter, Warren and Penelope sat on their porch watching the sunset. It was a ritual they'd maintained for years, this quiet time together at the end of the day. "I've been thinking," Penelope said, her hand finding Warren's, "about what Mrs. Henderson said all those years ago, about me being too independent. That old gossip. Why are you thinking about her? Because she was wrong, but also not entirely wrong. I was independent, fiercely so. I had to be to survive. But independence without connection is lonely. What you gave me, what we built together, is something better than independence." "What's that?" "Interdependence. The choice to need someone not because you have to, but because you want to. Because life is richer and fuller and more meaningful when you share it." Warren squeezed her hand. "You still scare half the men in this territory, you know." "Good," he laughed. "You're still the most independent woman I've ever met. That hasn't changed. But now I'm independently choosing to be with you, every day for the rest of my life. Same here, every day always." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family. Matthew and his new wife visiting for dinner. Sarah home from the university for the weekend. John's booming laugh as he told some story or another. This was their legacy, Warren thought, not just the business or the money or the property. But this family, this love, this proof that two independent people could choose each other and build something beautiful without either one diminishing. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None. You, not a single one." Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the stars emerge one by one above the mountains. Two people who'd chosen each other and chosen right, still building their life together after 25 years. The winters that followed were gentler for them both. They'd earned the right to slow down, to enjoy the fruits of their labor. The business ran smoothly under Matthew's capable management, with Sarah handling finances and John expanding their reach into new territories. Warren finished his book, a memoir of his years traveling the West and building a life in Utah. It was published to modest success, enough that he started working on a second one. Penelope read every word, offering the kind of honest feedback only a true partner could give. "This section about meeting me," she said one evening, pointing to a chapter. "You make me sound too perfect. I was prickly and defensive and difficult." "You were perfect," Warren insisted. "Perfect for me anyway. Revise it, make me real." People need to know that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections complement yours. He revised it, and she was right. The chapter was better for the honesty. Penelope's advocacy work gained traction. The territorial legislature passed a law expanding married women's property rights, and while she couldn't claim sole credit, she knew her testimony and lobbying had made a difference. It was satisfying work, using her experience to help other women avoid some of the battles she'd fought. Grandchildren started arriving. Matthew and his wife had twins, a boy and a girl who immediately became the center of attention. Sarah, surprising everyone, married a fellow student and moved to Denver, promising to return often. John remained happily unmarried, more interested in business expansion than domestic life. Warren and Penelope discovered the particular joy of grandparenthood, all the pleasure of children with none of the constant responsibility. They spoiled the twins shamelessly, teaching them to ride and shoot and think for themselves. "We're going to ruin them," Penelope said, watching Warren teach 3-year-old Emma to sit a horse. "That's what grandparents are for. Your logic is impeccable." On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Children, grandchildren, old friends, longtime employees, all crowded into the large house to honor Warren and Penelope's 3 decades of marriage. Old Thomas, now in his 80s and long retired, raised a glass for a toast. To Warren and Penelope Ingram. 30 years ago, this young hothead showed up in Provo chasing a business deal. What he found was something better, a partner in every sense of the word. A love that's inspired all of us who have watched it grow. They proved that 2 strong people don't have to diminish each other. They can build each other up. Here's to 30 more years. "Hear, hear," the room chorused. Warren stood, pulling Penelope up with him. "Thank you all for being here. For being part of our lives and our family. 30 years ago, I met a woman who everyone said was too independent, too strong-willed, too everything. And I fell in love with every bit of that independence, every ounce of that strength. Marrying Penelope was the best decision I ever made. Building a life with her has been the greatest adventure. I love you, Penelope Vance Ingram, today, tomorrow, always." Penelope's eyes shimmered with tears. "I love you too. Thank you for never trying to change me. Thank you for loving my spirit." They kissed to thunderous applause, and the party continued late into the night, filled with laughter and stories and the warmth of family and friends. As they grew older, Warren and Penelope treasured the quiet moments even more. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Evening walks through the timber yard that had started it all. Sunday dinners with the family, the table crowded and loud with conversation. They traveled some, taking the trips Warren had dreamed about. They visited California and saw the Pacific Ocean. They went to San Francisco and marveled at the city's growth. They even made it back to Missouri, where Warren showed Penelope the farm where he'd grown up. But they always came home to Provo, to the mountains and the valley and the life they'd built. This was their place, their anchor, their forever. Warren's health started to decline in his 70s, nothing dramatic but the accumulation of years of hard work. His joints ached in the cold, and he tired more easily. Penelope faced her own challenges, her vision weakening despite spectacles. They adapted, as they'd always adapted, finding ways to maintain their independence while accepting help when needed. Matthew and his family moved into the big house with them, providing care while respecting their autonomy. On a spring morning in 1905, Warren woke to find Penelope already up, sitting on the porch in her favorite chair. He joined her, moving slowly, his body protesting the early hour. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Didn't want to. The sunrise is too beautiful to miss." They sat together, holding hands, watching light spill across the valley, 53 years of sunrises together, and each one still felt like a gift. "You remember the first time you came to my office?" Penelope asked. "Like it was yesterday. You told me you didn't do business with people who didn't know how to wait for an invitation. And you sat down anyway. Best decision I ever made." She turned to look at him, her face lined with age but her eyes still that remarkable green. "I never thanked you properly. For what? For seeing me. For loving me exactly as I was. For never asking me to be smaller or quieter or more conventional. You let me be fully myself. That's not something to thank me for. That's just loving you right. Not everyone would have. Most men of our time wanted women to fit into neat boxes. You never tried to put me in a box. You never would have fit anyway." She laughed, the sound bringing Matthew to the doorway, checking on them. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Perfect," Warren said. "Absolutely perfect." They spent the day with family, a quiet Sunday of shared meals and gentle conversation. The grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter floating through the open windows. Sarah had come from Denver with her family. John stopped by between business trips. The house was full of life and love. That night, lying in bed with Penelope in his arms, Warren felt a profound contentment. This life, this woman, this family, it was everything. More than he'd dreamed possible when he'd ridden into Provo all those years ago, young and ambitious and alone. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Penelope whispered back. "Always and forever." Warren lived another 5 years, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84. Penelope mourned him deeply, the loss of her partner and best friend leaving a hole nothing could fill. But she didn't break. She carried on, as she'd always carried on, finding strength in family and purpose in continuing the work they'd built together. She lived to 92, sharp and fierce until the end. She died on a summer evening with all her children and many of her grandchildren surrounding her. Her last words were about Warren, about how much she'd loved him, how grateful she was for their life together. They buried her next to him in the Provo cemetery, under the same headstone. Warren Ingram, 1821–1905, and Penelope Vance Ingram, 1833–1925. Beloved partners in life and love, the timber business continued, passed down through generations, always honoring the partnership that had founded it. Penelope and Warren's story became legend in Provo. The independent woman and the cowboy who loved her spirit, building an empire together without either one diminishing. Their great-grandchildren still ran the company 100 years later, still guided by the principles Warren and Penelope had established. Respect, partnership, the understanding that strength doesn't diminish strength, but can build something greater together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light slants gold across the Utah Valley, people swear they can see 2 figures on the porch of the old Ingram house. An older couple, sitting close, holding hands, watching the sunset together. Still building there forever, one moment at a time. They said she was too independent. The cowboy loved her spirit, and together they proved that love doesn't require surrender, only partnership. That independence and intimacy aren't opposites, but complements. That 2 strong people can build something beautiful without either one becoming less. Their legacy lived on in the business they'd built, the family they'd raised, and the love story they'd written together. A testament to what's possible when someone sees you truly and loves you completely, exactly as you are.